Alright, so as far as whether or not civilization made human beings more violent or less violent, it's a tough thing to answer. It didn't change our inherent nature any. I'll say that. So in a sense, we're no more or less violent now than we were in prehistory. But what changed is, okay, with civilization, we see man start to build cities, walled-in fortresses with food surpluses stored in them, jewels and all these goods, these valuables stored in them. So right away we see that humankind is going to have to develop a means of protecting his stockpile from others. So we see a great investment into military technology, which seems to be an increase in violence. Now again, it's not an increase in the inherent nature of human beings to be violent. It's an increase in the necessity of our being violent. So not only are we going to develop this military technology to protect ourselves from being invaded by others who are trying to steal our goods, but we're going to develop the technology to steal their goods because we know behind their walls they've got all these goodies too. So it just sets up, as soon as civilization happens, it sets up that kind of a dynamic. Whereas prior to that, when we're sort of herders and hunting, gathering bands, smaller bands of people that didn't set up permanent cities with huge fortresses to protect them, we didn't have this war mentality. And what separates war from just a normal battle is, let's say you're just a tribe and you run into another tribe and you're nomadic. Um, you have nothing to protect or to try to keep the other from stealing from you. You just want to live your own peaceful life. So you come together, you'll have a quick battle, and yeah, maybe a few people will die, but then you'll back away and say, well, fuck this, let's just move over here, and they'll move over there. And because there was plenty of space, because population was lower. And this is another problem that we'll come across as food production. As we became more efficient at producing food, more efficient at storing food, our population skyrocketed. Darwin talked about Malthus and his ideas of food production and population, and that's very relevant here, because when there is that natural struggle for existence, which I don't know how much of a struggle it was, it's more that there's just a natural check in how large the population can become. It's not like lots of people are dying. It's that lots of people aren't being born and aren't even being allowed to be supported by these higher food levels, so that there's no suffering. It's like, in Africa, there's all these starving people. If we send them food, the starving people grow up, have more babies, and all of a sudden the amount of starving people is increased exponentially. But if we don't send them food, the same amount of people are going to die. And eventually it'll level out. Theoretically, I'm not trying to say that we shouldn't send Africa food or anything. So the idea that if food production or food resources are steady, that there will be a struggle. There is a struggle, but it's not an individual organism struggling. I mean, sometimes maybe, but it's more that the species itself, the population, cannot rise up to this high level up here where it would have to struggle and fight over with everybody else to eat the amount of food that's down here. It just never gets that high. So it's um, this level medium that's reached. Um, so civilization creates the need or the desire to want to stockpile food and steal other people's food, and or whatever the resources are. So in that sense, civilization does make us more violent. But again, it's not our inherent nature that's changing. It's just our culture that is changing. Because human beings can live in a variety of ways that are antithetical to the other, but that are both contained within our natural capabilities and the natural means of how our culture can develop. So I don't know if I was clear before about the difference between war and battle. A battle is like when you have a short little fight and then you disperse again. A war would be when you try to invade another person's fortress to steal their goods. Or you invade them and tell them, look, if you don't start producing all these goods for our empire, then we're going to kill you. So what does this mean about what civilization is? I don't really want to take a side and say civilization is good or bad. I don't think that's very useful, because whatever the case may be, civilization is the natural progression of life on Earth. It happened. It's here. So we can't assign a value judgment to it. That's not really useful. I'm just going to try to talk about what I think it is, what civilization is. Freud referred to it as civilization as the repression of our natural tendencies, and I think he's definitely onto something there. Civilization is sort of like whereas nature had been sort of unconscious, civilization, as man evolved into this higher order rational means of thinking, the unconsciousness of nature sort of man broke away from it and formed consciousness. And consciousness is supposed to be clean, clear, and well ordered, and makes sense for the most part. It's less violent, less barbarous, and but we tend to think that civilization is better than the natural state. And I'm not going to judge again. I'm just going to point out that while civilization on the surface likes to think of itself as clean and good and well ordered, underneath that surface, we're still dealing with this unconsciousness. Like, we still go to war. We still kill, Iraq's a good example. Perfectly civilized nation at war on the other side of the world, killing, who knows how many, 700,000 civilians possibly. We don't like to think about that. We don't like to think that civilization is responsible for that amount of violence, because we think we're so much better today than we were in prehistory. And it's not that human nature has been changed by civilization, but human behavior has, because all of a sudden our violent behaviors are so much more destructive because we've focused on developing the technologies to increase violence and to keep violence localized so that as not to affect the civilized people who live on this side of the world. We want to keep them away from the blood being shed on the other side to support their way of life. So civilization divides. It's very divisive because it takes the unconscious and puts it over here, and takes the conscious and puts it over here, and people don't realize that they're still connected. So yeah, I don't know exactly where you're going with your saying you wanted to disagree with whatever my answer was, but I'm looking forward to seeing exactly how you respond. So thanks for listening.